In today's episode, I had, a brilliant and very insightful discussion with Suzy Levy. Suzy is the best-selling author of Mind the Inclusion Gap, and having heard Suzy speak and read the book, I really wanted her to come along and be on the podcast. My goodness me, Suzy unpacks so many gems I want to describe, but really gets under the skin of, as leaders in the boardroom or at senior level, some of the challenges that you may experience. Suzy brings to life her own journey and experience and insights from starting her career as a management consultant and then moving into specializing in diversity and inclusion, and her breadth of experience, having sat on a number of boards. Suzy works with some of the top boards globally now, but she really talks to the reality of driving inclusion. She unpacks some of the key statements that she makes in her keynotes and in her book about it's not just about being nice, about inclusion being a skill set and not a trait, and just really helps, I think, all of us to understand more about what really drives change and creates inclusive cultures. And I think lots of food for thought and action steps is what she walks us through. After listening, I think you'll see why I am very keen for Suzy to join us again. Okay.
Hi.
Suzy, good morning.
Good morning.
Depending on when people will be watching this back, right? But my goodness, I have been so excited to welcome you to Bravery in the Boardroom. I'm sure I'll say more in the intro, but had the pleasure of hearing some of your talk at the She Leads for Legacy conference last year. We were just talking about how one of my daughters was like, Mum, you absolutely need to get Suzy onto the podcast, right? So here we are. So thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. And thank your daughter. I mean,
yes.
In all honesty, the fact that cross-generational we're talking about this,
yes.
It's super important.
Yes, it is. So many people will know, tuning in, that you're the best-selling author of Mind the Inclusion Gap. We have copies here today. But it'd be great for you to just share with us all what you do now.
Well, now is an interesting question. So I started my career in the late 90s. I joined a global management consulting firm, although at the time I didn't even know what that word was. Management consulting was new to me. I was quite a curious graduate. And because I'd grown up in a place with no running water, no electricity, on a farm, 10 acres, my parents didn't go to university, and my brothers and I were the first generation in the family to go into higher education. I didn't know what I wanted to do, right? I think a lot of children out there don't know what they want to do or who they want to be. A lot of adults out there still don't know.
Trying to find your purpose.
Yeah. And so I was really drawn to management consulting because it was new projects, new questions, problem solving, and it fit my endless curiosity. So the first decade and a half of my career was major projects for big corporations, doing technology implementations or big change management, things like launching the Xbox for Microsoft.
Wow.
So big brands, big projects. But when I moved to London in 2004, I got really interested in the people side of things. And it was because at the firm I was working for at the time, there was a lot of bullying and harassment in the London office that I hadn't seen in the office I had grown up in, if you will, in my career, which was Seattle, Washington. And so I knew it wasn't us. I knew it wasn't the way we behaved. I knew it wasn't good leadership. And I was just bolshy enough and young enough to challenge it and to successfully help remove those really negative behaviors. And for my thanks, or for my sins, I got noticed for doing those things, actually, because I had sort of a natural knack as to why are people doing this. I didn't really believe that people were baddies. I don't come across that many people who are super angelic or super horrific. Everyone's sort of somewhere in between. And I was curious as to what was driving them to behave in such a way. And my natural instinct sort of kicked in. And I was then asked to lead inclusion and diversity for my firm, along with a number of other things on top of my day job, which is often how it is. And that was around 2007. And it changed my career trajectory because I found sort of figuring out how to make a more equitable society the most interesting problem I had ever tried to solve. So even though I kept going back to client work, I went on to do bank mergers and other technical things in my career, I kept coming back to inclusion and ended up making it my full-time day job from 2012 onwards. So for the last 13 years, I've been working in inclusion and diversity. And today I run my own small company. I work with clients on their most complex human challenges they face. And some of them are beautiful opportunities and some of them are really difficult challenges. And they come to me to help them solve those. And often it's at the executive, the chair, the CEO level, where they're trying to figure out the right way forward. And they need a little bit of not only guidance, but strength in holding up the mirror about what's truly happening, why is it happening, and what are the options for embedding real change in their organization. So I do that day to day with my clients. As you said, I'm an author. But I also sit on a number of boards. So I spent 7 years as a non-executive director in UK government at some of our largest departments. So 6 years at the Home Office and a year on the executive board at the Department for Education. And then I chair 2 organizations. I'm chair of the Women's Sport Trust, which is a charity that believes that women's sport is one of the greatest ways to push gender equality in our society. Sport, like no other, has a way in. And we also love sport and love women playing sport. And I'm chair of a beach volleyball club in the great beach of Wimbledon, which is part of the, which is where I live, and it's part of the legacy funding from 2012. So I sit across a number of, I have a number of roles, some directly with clients, some as an author, and some as a chair.
So a real breadth of experience and expertise. And I think listening to what you shared there, Suzy, as well, you really are in the thick of what is going on in boardrooms at the moment and in relation to the inclusive agenda. Just out of in your whole journey and time, where did the book drop in? So when did you actually start writing your book?
So I started writing the book 7 years ago, and I did it all wrong. So to all listeners out there, don't do what I did, although it was a very good growing experience for me. The book started out with clients telling me, you've got to write a book. What's in your heart and in your head, the world needs to know. And there was probably a little bit of arrogance in, or not arrogance, but oh yeah, well done me, I should write a book, right? Wrong reason, absolutely wrong reason. So what happened is 7 years ago, the first manuscript I did in like 3 months. It was horrendous, Monique. I tore it up right away. I really not a book anyone would want to read. I tried again about 6 months later and really kind of pushed on it. And again, that second iteration of the manuscript, again, not worth reading. Now that one sat in a drawer because COVID hit not that long after. And the manuscript that I wasn't proud of, didn't want to see the light of day, sat in a drawer for 2 years while I did homeschooling and clients, and we thought the world was going to come to end and we were buying loo roll and all those other things. But I decided after the world kind of came back to a level of normalcy that if I was going to do it, I needed to do it well. And that's when I got serious about it. And I took a week off work and I went to the mountains. And actually a friend went with me who was building her own business. And I sat down, and over that week, not only did I confirm who I was writing it for, why I was writing it, but the full sort of narrative arc. And what you see here emerged from that quite quickly. But my change was not only my intentionality, but once I realized who I was writing for, and I was writing for the everyday person who is a really good human being, a very nice person who cares about this stuff, but for either reasons of being too busy or too afraid or maybe too lazy, there are all sorts of reasons, they don't take that good intentionality and turn it into inclusive action. And so once I knew I wanted to write for that person, I knew what needed to be in it, and it came together quite quickly thereafter.
And that person that you described, that avatar, is the majority, I think, of who you see, isn't it? Who you speak with, leaders in organizations, very much fit the bill of what you just described, right? Really do.
Busy, good human beings. Yeah. And I think the other bit that became clear to me is I was very grateful that my career had accidentally or purposely navigated me into such a space that I got to learn all sorts of skills and stop removing just being a nice person and realizing what I needed to do. And I was really interested in how could I speed up others' learning journey.
Yes.
Because not everyone has the opportunity to spend the time learning in the way that I did and making the mistakes in the way that I did. So I wanted to help that average person, because I do think it is the vast majority of us who sit in that middle ground, not the angel, not the devil, quite busy and busy for very good reasons with other stuff going on in our life. But many of those people care about where our future goes. Yes. They care about inclusion. They care about a more stable, equitable, fair world. But what they don't know is what their role is and how they can begin to transition to taking a more active, purposeful place in making it so.
And I'm gonna dig in with you, right?
Okay.
I'm gonna dig in with you
Yes,
as we're talking
please.
about some of the things, some of those statements in your book, because I think it would be helpful to unpack that. But I want to come back to your career journey a little bit. So it sounded very exciting.
There was a lot of boring in there too.
Question I always like to ask, though, especially to colleagues like yourself who have got to the boardroom.
Yeah.
What were the challenges along the way?
Oh, that is such a good question. I think some of the challenges for me is that I probably took a more indirect route, although I think the challenges turned out to be opportunities. So in my career, I tended to be very open to do what was asked of me by leadership and then cash in those favors when the time came. So that's how I ended up changing country for the same firm, right? But I often pulled myself out of what I would call the direct line upward, because it wasn't quite what I wanted. And I've always followed more of my head and my heart more than my head around that path, which means my route into executive leadership wasn't linear. And I think it isn't for so many people. Very few people climb straight up a ladder, right? So some of the challenges were resetting when I moved completely sideways into something new. That would take me time, right? And also not to get hung up on other people's version of success for me. Because even if you do take that alternative path, like I pulled myself out of a partner pipeline at a firm where partnership is deeply valued, right? And I took a move that was considered career suicide at one point. Like, why would you do that? It's less money. It's less this, and there's no route to partnership. There's less status. So one of the challenges is, even if you buy into and know at a really deep level in your heart that this is the right thing for you, it doesn't mean that you still don't feel that status drop.
For sure.
Right?
For sure.
So it's definitely taken me a while to figure out how to measure success differently. Not just in terms of salary, not just in terms of title or brand. Or kudos from other people. And I think that takes, that's an ongoing effort for me and probably for everyone out there, right?
For sure.
So that has been one of the challenges. I think the other, there have been moments as a woman, not so much later in my career, because everyone brings different pieces of themselves. And I'm not just a woman, but I'm an American woman who grew up with 2 older brothers, and I was treated like the third son. Which means I have more aggressive, and I don't mean that in a negative term, more assertive probably, more assertive tendencies. I have more masculine tendencies, and I have more American tendencies. So even though I am a woman, I play to the natural norm of an organization in the way I behave, and I'm valued for those things, and I can see that. So it's almost a leg up, if you will, because the game that's being played, I naturally fit into it, right? Early on in my career, though, there were moments where they weren't quite appropriate moments with men in power, and those moments were difficult, right? Where either being put in a slightly different box or in a compromised position that just because I was more junior and I happened to be a woman, it really wasn't okay, right?
Yeah.
So there were those little moments.
Yeah.
But I think my natural tendencies and that American third son, if you will, probably overwrote some of what would have reduced my confidence.
Yeah.
So there were incidences that I think would have reduced my confidence had I not had the upbringing and sort of the benefit of all those things, or the privilege of being treated like a boy.
Yeah. I really hear that, and I think it's so important to unpack that, because as you say, you recognize the privilege that it gave you to be able to maneuver or deal with those situations. And what you said there about and you'll know this fully in the work you do, you kind of fit with the organizations, the way we do things around here to a point because of that, right? But you'll be very aware of how do we change that when we're talking about inclusive environments. Right? So challenges were there, but you had some things in your locker that helped you with that.
That played to what others wanted of me. And I don't think I fully understood that actually until my first boardroom role. So the first board I joined, it was maybe 3 months in, a couple of board meetings had happened. And one of the senior British women said to me in a one-on-one, I cannot believe what you get away with in terms of your direct challenge of the men in the room. And I think it's because you're American, actually. You don't fit in our society, even though I'd been here at that point, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 years. But because you're not British, you're not being held to British standards of being a lady. You're never going to be.
So those stereotypes are removed.
Yeah, and expectations of femininity are dropped because the expectation is you'll be American ahead of you being a woman. And so I cannot, she literally said, I could never say the things that you say and not have them. And it wasn't that I was saying anything bad, by the way. I was just directly questioning things. And she basically said, if I did that, there would be consequence because of where I'm placed, but you're unplaceable. You sit in a non-British strata. Which I thought interesting, and I'd never thought about it before until this individual raised it to me, and it's been on my mind ever since in terms of what allows us the freedom to take on different personas and not have negative consequence when we do.
Or even to show up authentically.
Yeah, for me, right? I was showing up authentically, but it's a different persona than she felt she would have been allowed to have.
So the dynamic of one, power dynamics at play, isn't it?
Yeah.
Biases at play.
Absolutely. Or expectations.
Yeah. But then recognizing, like you said, that colleague censoring herself, almost going like, I just know I can't do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I also think there's a freedom of knowing you don't fit in. So, and I think individuals, when you're the only one on the board, you on one hand, that can feel really exposing, right? On the other hand, it can feel like a huge opportunity or something in your toolkit, because that same board, I was the youngest member of the board by more than a decade. And I think at the time I might have been the youngest non-executive in government at the time. And so on one hand, I was a little bit nervous going, I'm really young, right? Am I going to add the right level of value? Do I have the right amount of gray hair? No, I've got plenty of it. I've got plenty of it now. But you do question yourself on these things. And actually, I decided in the end that it was a huge win for me because I was not so far removed from the day-to-day. I could still remember the fundamental challenges. And I think sometimes people who've been around for a very long time sitting on boards don't remember what it's truly like at the coalface. And I think it's a really important skill set. So I decided to lean into the fact that I was younger and closer to the coalface rather than try and pretend I had more gray hair, if you will.
Speaking about that, so speaking about kind of how you navigated those spaces, some of what you experienced, how would you describe your leadership style? And I always ask this question to our guests, and I sort of say in 3 words, but I mean, I feel like I want to give you more to expand. But how would you describe your leadership style and how you show up in that space?
Well, I think you've probably already heard some of it. So I think I'm a very curious leader. So I love learning. And that has been my sort of golden thread throughout my entire career. When I made moves sideways or ones where people were looking at it going, really? Seriously? That move? It was always to follow where I was learning and where I was enjoying the problem itself, right? So I'm super curious. I'm also super confident, rightly or wrongly. And I think that comes from my upbringing and the way I was raised within my family unit. The expectation of confidence and the assertion that you should be here was really high in my kind of familial unit. But I think I'm probably also, what counters my confidence is I'm super open. Open to discussing stuff that needs to get discussed, open to new ideas, open to new people, cultures. That curiosity and openness kind of go hand in hand.
Yes.
So I think if I were thinking about three things, you asked for three words, I'd say probably curious, confident, and open. Others might add other. It's a great question to ask someone else about me as a leader.
So picking up on that. So if I pick up on the point of you being in boardrooms and what you just said there about being open, curious and confident. So to lean in, maybe, if I described it in that way. How do you influence the boardrooms that you're in to kind of create that psychological safety to have the uncomfortable conversations?
That is a really good question. I think that creating psychological safety and openness it takes time and trust and intentionality. So I've been in board scenarios where everything showing up to the board is green. Funny right? I sort of don't believe we're not pushing ourselves hard enough if everything's showing up as green, right? Similarly, I've been in board scenarios where everyone presenting is above a senior, almost too senior, right? So some of it is challenging over time the group or the board itself of, do we want to be the ones who are always hearing the good story, or do we need some real balanced viewpoints? Are we being honest with the conversation and honest with ourselves? And what will it take to do that? And are we bringing the right people into the room who have a vested interest in telling it how it truly is? So some of the minor movements I've made in order to create that psychological safety and openness has been asking for different people to present at the board who are a little bit farther down into the organization, right? Or similarly challenging and going, we just went through a 2.5-hour board meeting and I didn't hear one disagreement the whole time. Is that truly where we're at, or are we not saying what's on our mind, right? So sometimes it's just, not that I want to be in disagreeable scenarios. I mean, Monique, I don't, right?
But you understand that real psychological safety involves risk-taking, challenge, discomfort, right?
Yeah, and innovation requires pushing ourselves on certain things. So sometimes it's recognizing the absence of and going, what's absent from this place, and how do I create an environment, or why is it not happening? And there have been moments in my board career where I've noticed the body language of people versus what they were saying, and then gone and had a meeting afterwards and said, so you said this, but my instinct is slightly different. Tell me a little bit more. And I've had those individuals say, well, I told the board what they wanted to hear because that's what my boss said I needed to do. But actually, in reality, this is where we're at. And when you uncover those sorts of scenarios, you've got to lean in both to the fact that there's not an honest level of conversation at the board level, but also why individuals feel the need for everything to be that positive, because that is a cultural problem, right? So how do you root out that long-term cultural problem of everything looking rosy as opposed to let's talk about the real fundamental issues that we're facing?
And to be able to do that, do you feel that you've needed to have that autonomy of being a board member or being asked to come in as an advisor? Do you feel that, try not to ask this as a closed question, but what's your view on colleagues who may be holding responsibility for diversity and inclusion, so may not be, board level, but do you feel that they could approach that challenge, or do you feel like, no, you've got to have some skin in the game and autonomy to be able to do that?
No, I think you can challenge differently. I wouldn't pretend that it's as easy when your entire career, your performance review, and all of that is being dictated by the organization. So if there isn't a culture of allowing that level of challenge, it's much harder.
Yes.
However, I think, especially when it comes to inclusion and diversity, the more that individuals can put irrefutable data on the table to drive a certain level of challenge, the more successful they are. What I tend to see is, and not that stories and personal stories aren't powerful, they are, and I've got them all over in the book, right? Personal stories and lived experience are hugely powerful. But they are one way to change things, and data and insight is actually a faster way and a more common boardroom language. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so if you're not showing up with an arsenal of information, then I think you do set yourself up sometimes for more consequence, if you will, of the things that you're challenging. But when you show up with an arsenal of information, including stories that go well beyond your own, rather than just your own lived experience. And I think because we often put who leads inclusion and diversity is usually a person in one of those groups.
For sure.
There tends to be a tendency where people will lean on their own lived experience. Well, in my experience. But if you were running sales or marketing or, HR or any finance, if you were leaning into a decision based on your own lived experience and not what the wider experience or data was, you'd be called out, right? So I think it's using some of those non-diversity related good leadership tools and techniques to bring people on board. Sometimes I think we lean too much into the story of diversity.
I hear you.
And not enough on our executive capability.
I hear you. No, I hear you.
To make really sound decisions, right? Or
I sense a real triangulation of what you've explained there. So like you said, lived experience, yes. Data and insight, have the powerful, compelling situation and scenario that talks to it. But then also lean on your leadership capability and emotional intelligence to read the room about how to create that space for challenge, right? And if you've got enough skin in the game, go for it. And if you haven't, just think about how you might want to tailor that approach. Or I'd even add, who is it in the boardroom who could be that exec support or voice for you? Who's the person who's nodding, when you have presented? Who's nodding? Who's leaning in? Who's engaging? Who might that be who, could back you up on some of what you're trying to do? So it's really powerful in what you're sharing there. Why, yes, sometimes boards are resistant, full stop, and that's why they need people like you to come in, right? But other times just thinking about the approach, isn't it? If you've got a bit of a crack of an open door, here's the way that you could push it and really land what you're trying to get at.
And that has nothing to do with inclusion and diversity. That has to do with good savviness of executive decision making, right? So if you were preparing anyone to present at the board level, you would not only be thinking about what is it you want to walk out of that board with. Is it agreement? Is it understanding? Is it you want them to pick out of choices? What is the thing you're asking that board to do? Who in the room is probably with you? Who might not be with you? How do we get to them outside of the board scenario, right? All of those are just really strong skillfulness around getting a board to agree something. And then you throw in inclusion and diversity and the topic that you're talking about. But more often than not, I see people forget the really good executive thoughtfulness first and then add the topic later.
So building on that, you speak about being nice isn't enough. Right? You kind of touched on it a little bit in what we said earlier. So being nice isn't enough for true inclusion. So let's build on what we're saying here, the insights you're sharing to guide people. What 2 or 3 actions would you give who I describe as brave leaders? Brave leaders who want to move forward and build inclusive cultures. What's the action they should be taking beyond kindness or niceness?
Good question. You have lots of good questions, Monique. I think first and foremost, you have to believe and see that niceness and inclusion aren't the same thing. And I said that, but I think we should unpick that a little bit, right? A nice person doesn't know what they don't know. So you said, what 3 actions should an individual be taking or a leader be taking? If I look back on my own career and the moment when the pennies began to drop, so to speak, I thought I was inclusive up until I had my first aha, which I talked about on stage, that your daughter came up and talked to me about it. And I was asked by my LGBT network, would I sponsor an authentic gay leadership program? And I said no. As the executive sponsor of inclusion, we don't need a program for gay individuals or for individuals of color or for women. We'll do it all together. And they came back a few weeks later and convinced me because the course was half price, not because I'd changed my mind, but they knew I was savvy with money because I'd grown up with not very much of it. And when I went through that course as the executive sponsor, they asked me to be in the room. There were 15 gay colleagues, gay and bisexual colleagues. There weren't any trans colleagues in the room. 12 of whom were out at work and 3 of whom were not. And as I listened to their experiences of going in and out of the closet, you know, new client team, new situation, new country. We were a consulting firm and we were sending people to places where it was illegal to be gay, right? And people were having to form new teams every few months, new boss, new client, new colleagues. That's how consulting works. Yeah. I, as a heterosexual leader, had never, ever, ever considered the process of coming out because in my mind, out was the day you told your mom and dad, you told your best friend, your loved ones, and you're forevermore out. And that couldn't be further than the truth, right? Out is every new team, every new moment, every new restaurant, every new high street you're walking down, where you are assessing both physical and psychological safety and the relevance. You know, am I going to bring this part of my life in? And in that moment, I realized I hadn't been inclusive because I didn't know and I didn't understand the process of coming out over and over again. I had never made it easier for a colleague to come out with me. And I had staffed, I think, 35, 40 teams at that point in my career, or been part of a team. And so knowledge, you asked what are the first thing is you don't know what you don't know. And nice people don't know very much. Now they could if they'd gone on a knowledge journey, but they're not related at all. They're totally unrelated. And so if you lean on your niceness and don't go get the knowledge around what it's like not to be you, you are at a huge disadvantage. It's really unlikely you're being inclusive if you haven't gone and gained that knowledge. So the first thing is go get the knowledge, whether it's reading a book like mine or listening to a podcast or watching, you know, something on TV, if that's your documentary, whatever it is, or being in the room for all these events, right? It's being in the room and hearing it that opens your eyes. So you got to be knowledgeable. I think the second thing is you have to decide to give a damn. Because with knowledge, you can look at it and go, yeah, sucks to be you, right? Or that's never happened to me. And you can dismiss it very, very easily. And even though I learned that lesson, it would take me a while to realize that I was dismissing the lived experience of other people because I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. I hadn't seen it happen. And I also didn't have the skills and capability. So I often talk about the first time my our Black network, it was called the African Caribbean Network, brought me a document. So the head of the network brought me a document with the lived experience of more than a dozen Black colleagues, where they shared institutional racism in stories, right? Systemic racism. And I read that document, Monique, and I said, I'm not sure it's racism. Now, if you just pause for a second and take race out of it, I said to 12 people, I wasn't in the room and I have better judgment than you do. Ooh, how arrogant, right? Forget the topic. You wouldn't tell 12 other people I wasn't in the room but I'm actually more savvy and smart than you. It's just icky, even in itself. And then you add in the fact that I'm a white woman who's probably never experienced racism in my life. Now, what was happening, and I share this because I think other people have done or are doing what I was doing.
For sure.
I didn't want us to be racist, so I was projecting a positivity bias, right? But also, I didn't have the skills to understand how systemic racism manifests differently than the vulgar, visible, fireable.
Yes.
And I was looking for things to fire, right?
Yes.
So I didn't have the understanding that systemic isms live in these dips in positivity rather than the presence of negativity. That would take me almost a decade to fully understand that. But if I go back to your question, which is what do people need to do? I think they need knowledge. They need to decide to care and to go a little bit farther with that knowledge, right? So what do I do now that I know systemic is, instead of trying to explain it away, what's my role in using the power that I have to take an empathetic stance to figure out how to fix it? And not in a harsh or negative or shaming or blaming sort of way, but I hold a lot of power. So you have to get that knowledge, decide to care, and then use your positions of power. Because all of us have moments when we're in positions of power.
For sure.
And sometimes I'm in high power, high influence, and other times I'm not in high power, high influence. But when I am, it's taking that time and using my voice to create the change I want to see, or taking the action I want to see. So I think it's a 3-part path. You've got to have knowledge, a level of empathy and giving a damn, and then you've got to go do something when you have those positions of power and influence.
My goodness me, what you've just unpacked there is absolute gold, right? Absolute gold.
It's grey hair gold.
You know, because if you get to know me, I'm all about the how, right? Because we hear so much about the what. And one of the reasons why I really wanted you to have time with us is because I knew you would unpack the how and really talk to it from where we know the majority of senior leaders are at when they are sitting there looking. And just the way that, I really appreciate your honesty in kind of bringing to life what you
examples
did. And what you experienced and how you abused your power in that situation. But recognizing how and why it happened, just talking to the feelings that show up, I think is so important, because it will resonate whether we like it or not. It will resonate with people who are listening. And what you explained there about the difference between what you were looking for as the exec sponsor, right? What your mind and I was looking for versus what was actually happening. But because it didn't show up in the way that you were expecting, you didn't necessarily recognize it at first. This is real. This is really powerful. I will say it in the intro, but I really urge people to listen very carefully to what you unpacked just now in answering that question. Super, super powerful in understanding how you may react and behave in those scenarios. I think that is what will resonate with people a lot. So I want to dig into that more. I want to get more into our leaders, because I like to bring it to the reality of what we know leaders are facing in the boardroom and working at more junior levels. You speak about inclusion being a skill set and not a trait. And I think some of what you've shared with us so far is almost talking about the skill set to be developed. Is there anything else you'd add to that in kind of what you think leaders should be focusing on in terms of developing that skill set?
I think far too often we bluntly tell people to go be inclusive. And whether we're the leader who's asking it of people or we're the one being asked of, the be inclusive, I think is almost slightly ridiculous, because it's not defined. What is inclusion? Because if I asked 100 people, I would get almost 100 different answers in terms of what inclusion means to them. I think diversity, we're pretty good at defining. It is difference, whether it's a protected characteristic or something like being the third born, or, diversity is endless, the differences among us. But how do you include, and what does that look like? I think as leaders, deciding to define it and being really clear, not expecting the people around us to guess either the behaviors or skills that we're looking for. So I think we need to, I don't necessarily like the word codify, but we do actually need to put pen to paper and say, what fundamentally are we looking for different behaviorally?
Yes.
What does that look like in the scenario of recruiting, in the scenario of doing a performance review, in the scenario of preparing someone for a board meeting? There's so many moments of opportunity, and we need to understand what inclusion looks like, not just day to day, but in the big moments of opportunity and how they feed into each other. And similarly, if we are a leader of difference, we sit in one of those categories, those protected characteristics. I think we also need to spend time being really clear on what our ask of the majority is, because I think there's far too much guesswork. So what is an ally, right? I wrote a book about allyship, but lots of people don't even like the term. Rather than spend too much time debating on whether the term's a good one or not, I'd rather we get into the actual meat of behaviors that we're talking about. But I don't think it's fair to say we want allies from individuals in a group, including women, right? And not define what we need. Why would we wait for everyone to guess? To me, there's just too much variance in that, right? Yeah. And so being a little bit more thoughtful and prescriptive and premeditated in our ask, if we sit in one of those diverse groups, to say, here's what I need different. Here's what I need from you. And even better, I have a couple of clients of mine joke, because I call it my BYOB strategy, which stands for bring your own bloke, as an example.
Rather than bring your own drink.
Rather than bring your own drink. You can bring your own drink too, if that's what you need for the scenario. But the point being, with why I call it a BYOB strategy, is often we will create an environment and say, this other group is welcome. So International Women's Day, men are welcome to come. Yeah. The invite is too big. Men are welcome. If I look over and I say to a specific man, let's say my brother Paul, right? I would like you to be in the room with me, please. Because I think we can work together and there's some change I'd like you to partner with me on. It fundamentally changes the game. And similarly, if you're gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, bringing someone in the room who is your ally. If you're an individual of color, bringing someone into the room going, as a white woman, Suzy, would you come into the room with me and share this experience? And then we jointly work together in allyship. I think that has a lot more potential to drive change. So it's not just being really clear what we want, being very good at defining inclusion and helping take the guesswork out, being very clear what our ask is of allies, but making the ask individual. It's almost I just can't imagine anyone turning away and saying, no, Monique, I won't for you.
It's a lot more difficult.
I won't for you, Monique. I mean, I'm never going to say that, right? I'm never going to say that, because you have asked me at a human to human connected level to be in the room.
Yeah, it's explicit. I see what you mean about how we almost drilling down and being, like you said, very clear on the ask and the expectation. Right? Because we haven't got time to waste. I think that's the other thing as well, right? We're trying to push the agenda, and I use the term all the time about turning the dial now. So before we finish, the bit I didn't want to miss was tapping in a little bit, because you've shared so much insight about senior level colleagues, leaders, colleagues up and down the organization, if you hold the brief for diversity and inclusion. I want to come back to your boardroom experience, and a lot of our listeners are aspiring, board members, usually from underrepresented backgrounds. But for me, like what you said, it's about both sides of the coin. We need our colleagues in the majority to be leading inclusively as well. So what would you share about the connection between the different boards you've sat on? Because you sat on and worked with public sector, commercial and private sector, charity sector boards. What insights would you share?
So first and foremost, I don't think enough people create or see the tether between the three. So if you take third sector, so that's charity boards, public sector and private sector, there's a set of skills that go across to all three. And if we bring it back to certain groups, so if we're talking about race for a moment, I see way more white individuals in my network doing more, let's say, joining a school board, right? So that is what I would call base level public sector board at a local level. And then you might have an arm's length body, which is a little bit bigger, and then you might get all the way up to a department board like the ones I've sat on. Similarly, when we start in third sector, you might have a small micro charity that you are on the board of first. And then it gets to a slightly bigger one, and the next thing you know, you're on Cancer Research UK, or, you know, what I would call the FTSE 100 of the charitable sector. But some people will come to me and go, I want to join Macmillan, or I want to join British Heart Foundation board. And I'm like, so what boards have you been on? And they haven't thought about that strata of boards, either in third sector or in public sector or in private sector, right? So you don't jump to the top of a FTSE 100 board if you haven't been on a board of a smaller organization. And it's not just FTSE 250, but even joining the board of a SME is experience, right? And so thinking about building, if you have aspirations to be on some of those top level boards, I would think about tiers across all three. There's kind of a entry tier, a mid tier, and a top tier. And sometimes you can go up to a mid tier in one and then jump over to a mid tier in another. So I jumped to public sector top tier before I jumped ever to private sector top tier, because I'd been at a top tier in the third sector. So it's just thinking about those three, because you're developing skills in all of those. In all of those, you're looking at what's the purpose of the organization, who are we there to serve, who's our customer base, how are we using our finances and our resources to deliver on those, you know, what are the risks we face, you know, there's a whole series of questions at a really sort of profound, why do we exist as an organization level, that are the same in every sector, right? And you can gain great experience from that. So I would really encourage listeners to be thinking, if I have an aspiration up here, what are some of the things I could be doing across those three? Because there's so many more opportunities
for sure
than we see.
I think, and to build on that, what we are seeing coming through now is more initiatives to support underrepresented colleagues to get onto charity boards, so to become trustees, to become school governors. So there's been quite a big push across the NHS in particular. We're trying to attract NHS staff into school governor roles as that first foray, as you say, to get the board level exposure on maybe more of a micro level to build it. So really good to hear you kind of reinforcing that and also hearing about your journey and how it helped. I have second to last question now, because something I wanted to ask about it that's in the book, and that is very much a hot topic at the moment, is about multi-generational workforces. And in your book, you talk about generational and gender norms shaping behavior. We spoke about earlier your example, what you gave, you know, with your fellow board member talking about, well, you could get away with that and I couldn't. And I think that was a great
cultural norms,
right? Cultural and gender norms playing out there. But how do you see some of the particularly generational norms playing out in boardrooms that you're working with at the moment, and what can we do to counter that?
I would say multi-generational behavioral patterns is on almost every executive's mind that I know of. It becomes more on their mind, I think, when there's high attrition. And at the moment we're in a lower attrition because of where the markets are at. So it has suddenly slipped down some agendas, but I think it needs to go back up. I think there tends to be, in terms of generational norms, a lot of biases and assumptiveness. And people say things cross-generation, both young to old and old to young. And then there's everyone's squidged in the middle, exhausted, you know, probably parenting and caring and all of that. But I think just being really careful with our assumptiveness about other generations, right? But also realizing the value in what they bring. So you'll hear younger people say, you know, that in their day.
Yeah.
Da, 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 da.
Yeah.
But actually recognizing that is true, right? I mean, my youngest daughter said to me a few months ago, they were studying Victorian era. She said, you know, in the olden days, Mommy, when you were young. And I was like, I don't know if it was the olden days. But yesterday I was talking to her and I said, well, there weren't mobile phones when I was growing up. And she looked at this. So this is in our kitchen. She looked at me while she's talking to Alexa and said, Mom, what do you mean there weren't mobile phones? And I said, we had fixed line phones. You had to like walk up and dial in a house or in. Her eyes were just like, she's 9, right? She can't imagine a world without phones. I think we have to understand the positivity and the stuff that came with some of that and value it. So as young individuals, valuing some of what individuals of an older generation will have, and similarly valuing what younger individuals will have. And I think the greatest tension I see in intergenerational is actually about being in the workplace. So COVID created, I think there's 2 major tensions at play. One is everybody in 5 days a week or remote working. And it's not as binary as that, right? Teaching people when they need to be in and when they don't need to be in, I think, is the more sophisticated way. So it's for the moment. But similarly, there is a real assumptiveness around inclusion and diversity and activism as it relates to, because we're talking about inclusion and diversity. I think younger individuals are way more likely to call something out and say, it's not on, it's not acceptable, you're being an ist, right? So they're way more likely to challenge something in what I would call big A activism, blunt force activism. And often that doesn't go down very well with an older generation. In particular because we didn't speak about those things. And also blunt force isn't often the way decisions and change get made. And so I think there's a little bit of a meeting in the middle. The seeing when a younger person, why they're asking for the change. And actually there's goodness that they don't want to live in a world that replicates some of the inequality or a lot of the inequality that's been there for centuries, right? But similarly, having young people recognize there are different forms of activism. There are moments when we can challenge things, and there are other moments when actually our challenge does the opposite of what we had intended. And so maybe getting a little bit more sophisticated in what I call little a activism, more gentle in the moment, and also recognizing why does this exist? Is it because the person's a baddie and an ist? Or is it because they have absolutely no idea? Or is the situation driving it? And so it's a little bit more of, you know, I think we should be unapologetically ambitious for change. But we need to be really thoughtful about how we get there together.
So that insight and sharing of understanding to almost help the different generations to understand each other more really underpins, isn't it, sort of a successful, dynamic, diverse team?
Yeah, and working together. And you asked the question about intergenerational, but I think you could say the same things about men and women working together. And when we look at the pushback, not just in America, but the pushback around the world and the frustration from men who in high activist, big A activist moments, things are said which are wholly unhelpful, putting men in categories that maybe do not apply to them, right? And it suddenly becomes an us and them, very threatening.
It's volatile.
We're not, volatile, we're not working together, there's no space for nuance. And actually, that if we talk about feminism for a second, those feminist ideals are wonderful in terms of what they're looking for in equality and change for women. But if you do it in such a way that either creates absolute tissue rejection and pushback, or it minimizes the chance for men to also emancipate and find a new version of masculinity and all those other things, it's wholly unhelpful. And so it's not just generational. I think we've got a lot of us and them.
It's polarized.
Polarizing, whether it's race or, you know, there are multiple scenarios where I think we have to come together and find ways and be a bit more strategic without losing our ambition. I'm not saying lower our ambitions. but different approaches, I think, are required.
I really hear that, what you're saying. Like you said, it's very easy to hear, let's come at this a different way, as we don't really want to tackle it, right? And that's not what you're saying. What you're saying is, let's think about sustainable, impactful change, because if you hit tissue rejection, the barriers go up, nothing's going to happen.
You're done.
If anything, people are going to dig their heels in. Doesn't help anybody. That's what I'm hearing there.
Yeah.
Gosh, you've shared so much in what we've spoken about today. Apart from reading your book, where can listeners hear and find out more from you?
Well, obviously on your great podcast. Do you know what? You can read the book, you can listen to it on Spotify, Audible. It's on, if you enjoy hearing me speak. I did my own audiobook, so you get to hear this voice again in everything that's inside. To be honest, LinkedIn is the best place to find me, or you can drop me a direct note through my website.
Okay.
My organization is called The Red Plate. But more importantly than, connect with me on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Challenge me if you thought there was a place that I need. But also I love talking about and driving more change in this space. So just reach out.
That's wonderful. So we will put all those links in the show note for people. And one thing you didn't say is you've got a new edition.
I do have a new edition, right? So the book came out 2 years ago. It has, Mind the Inclusion Gap has a lot around the challenge, the pushback, the tissue rejection, the us and them, and then what we can all go do about them. Because this building challenge, and obviously there's very acute challenge in the US at the moment, has been coming for quite some time. It's been growing and growing and growing. The new edition talks about what's happened in the US, the executive orders, and ways in which we can strategize to avoid the pushback and begin to collaborate rather than be politicized by our individual views. And that's out 1st of September, but you can pre-order it, Waterstones, Amazon, etc. You'll see it's got with a new prologue on the side of the book. I don't have a copy yet. My copies haven't come in because it's not here till 1st of September.
That's fantastic, Suzy, because I think the people trying to understand the pushback, what you can do about it, like you said, how do we understand the way to kind of challenge that? And also I think there's something here, listening to you today, and I said I've heard you speak before, you're a movement in yourself, right? You really are, because I think you're bringing a different kind of conversation around inclusion. And as I said, there's so much about the how. Having that additional chapter, I think, will be so powerful now, because we have got, on this side of the pond, we have got organizations and leadership teams who do want to still prioritize inclusion, but maybe are struggling with that case for change and how to explain it. And we've got some who are maybe thinking that they can drop it down the priority list. And I think either way, that new chapter will really give some insights into what people can be doing. So my last question, okay? You mentioned about beach volleyball, but I always like to ask, you are extremely busy. What do you do to get balance and kind of prioritize your well-being?
Well, I think first and foremost is recognizing that, and it took me a while to recognize this, that in your life you go in and out of balance. It's not like you achieve balance and you're forevermore there. So it's a constant watch for me. Sport is something that changed my life, right? It helped me go to university when there wasn't money in my family to do university, but it also grew me in ways, I wasn't very good at it. So it was really good because it taught me that if I stuck with something, I could find a path to success, not because I was natural. I was 2 left feet girl. And I love both the sort of personal intimacy of bettering your own mind and body, right? And trying something over and over and again. And I love team. So one of my great balances is beach volleyball. I run a club, but I also coach. That's not very balanced because sometimes it's exhausting and I come home and have to sit on the couch from coaching teenagers every Saturday morning. But when I play, and I play every single week, all year long, rain, sleet, snow, sunshine, I'll be playing in 33 degrees on Sunday morning at 8 a.m. I lose myself in a wonderful way. I shed all of the weight of trying to change the world. I shed the weight of being a parent. I shed the years and the gray hair, and suddenly I just am. Yeah. And I think finding your thing where you can let go of all the roles you play and just be in the moment. For me, sport is that. And beach volleyball is the sport I love. And I love playing it for the joy and the separation where I get to exist in a whole new plane in my life for 2 hours.
If that hasn't motivated any of our listeners, right, to think about taking up a sport as part of their leisure time.
Or music,
yeah, whatever that is,
whatever
right?
it is for
but,
you,
yeah,
right?
Thank you for bringing that to life in terms of sharing what you do, but also what you get from it, and the importance, I think, is what I heard there as well, of having or trying to achieve balance when you are, you know, a large scale change agent is how I would describe it.
You've got to replenish, right? And I think with these topics, they're so close to the heart. You're giving your time, your energy, but you are giving yourself to them. Whatever your mechanism is. I mean, I play a lot of sport, but I also read a ton, and I read a ton of fiction.
Yes.
Because sometimes I need to hit the escape button, and whether TV is your escape button or, you know, whatever the thing is, but I find fiction in particular takes me away from where we are right now and allows me distance for a few hours, so that when I come back, I haven't been rolling around in the really difficult. And you need reprieve, whatever gives you the reprieve to come back with energy and positivity and new creativity and ideas. And it takes that, as you know, over an extended period of time to drive this kind of change.
Suzy, thank you so much.
You're
I feel like it would be wonderful to invite you back. I think
please.
It really would be good. And I think there were so many. You took us on a journey. In this conversation. But I also know there were so many points that I wanted to drill into even more. So if you are open to it, I think it would be great. You know, once your new edition is out, to invite you back to just kind of be able to dig into it more. I'm sure our listeners will want to hear more.
I'd love to, Monique.
But thank you so much for today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.